You'll hear me. I'm not got a very loud voice anyway, so the microphone, I'm in that weird thing of do I talk normally, deafen everybody, or just talk normally. So we're all okay. Andy Murray, yes, I've got a tennis-related name. Fortunately for me, my cousin's son is called Jack Draper, and I'm fortuitously having a tenuous-related tennis name to that side of the family. So yeah, Andy Murray, Freedom Manager for Commonwealth War Resolution in the south east of England. I've got a bit of a slide later on what that covers, so I won't go into too much detail. The aim of this presentation really is to go from the enormity of what the Commonwealth War Graves Commission does down into Mike and Rick's talks, down to the minutiae of that local churchyard and the commemorations therein. And then you can get an idea of the scale of what we have to do globally in the UK, and then down into the churchyards and local cemeteries. So that's the idea of the presentation. I'll talk about who we are as a Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I'll touch on where our origins come through, and we'll get feedback.
I think it's that, that's right, Mike's going to do it.
Hopefully that's okay. Our origins and how we come to being, going back to First World War. I touch on our global commitment, because you have an understanding of the scale of what we have to achieve, and then how our work continues down into the UK and how we operate in the UK. We have the same core principle in the UK, how we look after and care for those fallen from the First and Second World Wars, but we operate differently because, by and large, we don't own the land where our commemorations are. We only have one Commonwealth War Graves cemetery in the UK, and that's a Brooklyn Military Cemetery. Everywhere else sits within the churchyard or commemorations or local authority land. So we have to operate differently. Over in the Western Front, France and Belgium, a lot of those, yes, there are people buried, commemorated in churchyards in French and Belgian churches, but by and large, they are in Commonwealth War Grave cemeteries on the battlefield, or just off the battlefield, where you might have had military hospitals or training stations. This is how we operate in the UK history. So, who are we? A big infographic, and some of it's off here, some of it disappeared off there. So, a global organisation. We are a non-profit organisation that operate under the Royal Charter. So we're not a charity, it is a non-profit organisation. The scale of what we do is we commemorate 1.7 million servicemen and women globally that lost their lives in the First and Second World War, and a slight period thereafter for each of those wars. And within those 1.7 million, there are 1.1 million and growing headstones within our global organisation that we maintain. The reason why I say growing, I'll touch on it later, we have commonly in France and Belgium, new bodies have been discovered during construction, and those bodies are either hopefully identified through DNA testing, or they are then buried in further unknown servicemen of the First and Second World War. So there's new headstones. Within the UK, we continue to have previously uncommemorated service men and women for the First and Second World War. It tends to be more the First World War. I'll touch on that a bit later on. So that number is growing. And the other important number there, you can't see it, it's just got 3,000. The number that's missing from there is the 2. So we have 23,000 locations globally where we have a single headstone commemoration, or up to our largest cemeteries in the Western Front, Tiet Val, Tyne-Cot, Lissenhoek, and then over in the likes of Thailand and Kanchanaburi, or Kranji in Singapore, or Bayeux in Normandy, wherever I like. So it's from, in my local churchyard in Hermitage, just up the road outside Newbury, we have one headstone, whereas I think in Tyne-Cot it's 28,000 or something. So how are we set up? And I'm not going to go too much how we're funded. I've always said we're a non-profit organisation, but I quite often get asked how are we funded. We are publicly funded, and we're publicly funded through our member governments. So we have Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, India, and United Kingdom, Great Britain, Northern Ireland. And we're proportionately funded through the number of commemorations that there are of those member states. So Great Britain and its Commonwealth countries that served under the Great British mantle, then Canada, then Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and India all feed into our budget and how we are funded, and that's spread out as a global organisation. Let's go back to that slide there. Number of staff. That's like 1,380 staff, which is not a lot of staff for a global organisation. There's probably some UK countries who've got 3 or 4 times that many just in the UK country. So I look after the whole of South East England, and I've got 30 members of staff to help me look after. I'll touch on how we will organise later on. As we touched on, to commemorate, our job as the Royal War Rescue is to commemorate those from the First and Second World War, and I'll touch on the dates in a second. So that is across all services, and there are slight nuances for the likes of the Merchant Navy in the First and different in the Second World War, but by and large, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Royal Flying Corps, and the auxiliary services that are around it. And there are some slight nuances. And men and women, all the Commonwealth nations, India, South Africa, and the premise of what we do is that no one person is commemorated any differently depending on rank, status, ethnicity, religion, race, or sex. It is a, I would say agnostic, that's probably not the right word, but nobody's treated any differently. And a good example of this, if you go down to Southampton, near the General Hospital in Southampton, is Hollybrook Cemetery. And in Hollybrook Cemetery is a memorial to those with no known grave, predominantly Army, who by and large lost at sea. HMS Hampshire had a very famous person on it when it sunk in June 1916. Anybody know who that was? Kitchener. So on the Hollybrook Memorial, Kitchener is the first name on it. And then, I think it's 1917, 1916, 1917, there's a ship called the SS Mendi, which is sailing from South Africa with a number of South African troops, predominantly South African natives from the South African Labour Corps and Carrier Corps, coming over to Britain to then to be processed and then probably off to France to serve the Western British Labour Corps. That got hit by the ship and sunk with probably the loss of, I think it was about 600 or 700, only a few survived. And on that same memorial next to Kitchener are the South African Labour Corps, who by and large, I guess, not really probably spoke English, probably didn't even know why they were coming, and certainly didn't know why, and would have no idea that they were on the same memorial as Kitchener. And that is, to me, one of those great episodes where you see it. We don't differentiate between race, religion, rank, or the likes. So our qualifying criteria, the Commission had to put some dates somewhere in terms of, otherwise we would continue to commemorate thereafter, and it would just join up. So for the First World War was the 4th of August, which is the start of the First World War, and we chose the 31st of August 1921, which in theory for the British was when we decided probably that was the end of the First World War. Different nations had different dates, but that's the date we went for, the 31st of August 1921. And then for the Second World War, it was the 3rd of September 1939, the start of war in Europe, and it ended on the 31st of December 1947. So, the people we commemorate, all civil services, there are some strange rules and how we commemorate, but by and large we focus on the Army, the Navy and the Air Force and the troops that were served under those. If you were serving an active service at any of those dates, and you died on active service, you get a Commonwealth War Grade Letter, or you're commemorated as a Commonwealth War Grade or a war casualty. Even though we know 11th of November 1918 was the end of the First World War, and then we had VE Day, VE Day, VJ Day in 1945. But we continued to commemorate. Also, if you were discharged you also continue to be commemorated if your death after discharge was attributable to service life. So, if in the First World War you served in Salonika and you got malaria and you died of malaria, it's not a very common disease back home, but that was by and large attributable to service life. So you died of malaria, tuberculosis, quite a few that could be attributable to life in the trenches. If it could be proved that your death was attributable to service life, you can come under that umbrella of a war grave. Which is why now we have more and more records, more people research it. We get people who are previously not commemorated. So, I served 30 years in the army. My run-out date was on my birthday, on 26th of October, but because I saved all my leave, I left my unit in July of the same year, so I had like a 4-month period before I was actually discharged. So as far as the army is concerned, when I left in July and went home, that's it. No more interested in me. Hopefully I'll get my pension at some point. And if I died in that period, perhaps in the First World War, the family thing, you're out the army, you're out the Navy. So when you died, everybody went, oh well. Not attributable. So they probably never passed it on to the army. Why would they? Perhaps they never had a wife, a family. It might have been a son that never had any next of kin. So no messages got through to say they are fitting to that qualifying period. Why in 1921 would somebody go, they're a Commonwealth War grave? How would they? Why would they? But now through research, people are then finding these casualties that served in the First World War or served in that qualifying period, their death could have been attributed. So I'll go with the Isle of Wight, and it's very much that case. If you discharged from the Navy, it's sent on furlough before it's discharged. So it was sent on leave, left with the naval unit, gone home, died a few days after. And then there's any recent research you can now commemorate it, not commemorate it. So that's that qualifying period. So we've got instances where people, they all started in South Canterbury, 14 or 15, got septicemia, doing training in like 1920, because he died over that period in the service. He comes into the qualifying period. So go back to our origins. That's who we are. Global organisation, we commemorate the fall of the First and Second World War. Our origins. So it starts with a chap called Fabian Ware. So he was overseas, I think, with the Red Cross, and then decided or realised we needed to start cataloguing and recording the dead on the Western Front, and then spreading further the likes of Gallipoli and other theatres of war, in East Africa, wherever there might be. That then grew into how we do it over in the UK as well. And then it came to being, well, how are we going to commemorate? Previously, the Boer War, the likes of it was a burial pit, people would put one pit, and you might have a single mark on the grave. If you were an officer, you might not bury separately, but generally, the Boer War and the wars before the First World War, we didn't really do anything. So, the Imperial War Grave Commission was then set up in 1917 to then learn and understand and then decide how we are going to commemorate the fall of the First World War globally. And that then started to build into how we set up cemeteries, how we go to mark them, and then that's where you start to get that build-up of what we see today. If you've ever been over to the Western Front, you've been in churchyards where you've obviously cross the sacrifices, that all comes under a book. So you think if you go onto our website and go to the archives, that book is on there. There's how to set up a cemetery. So every book becomes universal and the same, regimented. So amongst those people working with Fabian Ware, the architects of Lutyens, Baker, Blomfield, who were all building and the architects are designing the look and the feel of the cemetery. But we also had a chap who lost his son, John Kipling, Irish Guards, in 1915. But he was the literary editor of how we commemorate. So he coined a phrase that is the biggest single piece of work since the Pharaohs, and obviously they worked in Egypt, and that still stands testimony today. So our work hasn't ended. We still continue to care and look after all those graves, the First and Second World War in perpetuity. That's our mission. That's our Royal Charter. But he also coined the phrase for their name liveth forevermore, which I think was taken from Ecclesiastics, and it's shortened down. So where we have, I'll touch on it in a little bit, where we have larger cemeteries, we've got more than 1,000 burials, you tend to have a stone remembrance, and on there it has their name liveth forevermore. And that's our epitaph to the dead, to ensure that their name lives on. So the founding principles, that's the book there. If you go to archives, I'm very sure it's searchable and download it and read it and go through it. What I will say with the commission, don't hold us to that book. Okay? There are exceptions to nearly everything in the commission. But we've been around 108 years or something like that, and there's been a lot of staff changes since then, since we found it. So things do change, and there are exceptions. So don't hold us to that. The premise is that all the names should be commemorated by a headstone or memorial. So if there is no burial, or there is no grave, their name should then appear on a memorial. So we have the Tierra Memorial, Portsmouth Naval Memorial, Chatham Naval Memorial, Runnymede Air Forces Memorial. There are a number of memorials across the globe where there are no known grave. We can do that. The headstones and memorials should be permanent. That's a given. War graves are protected. So the ones in the churchyard, even though it might be a private grave, the bones are protected by law. And the theory that markers, even if it's our headstone or a private marker, has some protection in the law, but the graves are protected. And the headstone should be uniform, no distinction from rank or status. What that means is it does say what rank you are. It goes back to like the Hollywood Memorial, where you've got General Lord Kitchener and private from the South African Lady. There's no difference. And in theory, some cemeteries you will have officer, private, field marshal, private. Early cemeteries, there was perhaps a bit of separation where officers were buried in certain areas and officers of ranks in other areas did have that. But by and large, they all have the same pattern headstone, commemorated the same way. So how are they commemorated? Generally, certainly at the Western Front, most cemeteries will have a commission headstone, commission pattern headstone. The odd one in I think the Western Front might have got, so the family members got in there a little bit early and maybe got a private marker in, there's a few, but not so many. Within the UK, where a plot of land has been set aside for war burials, First World War, that tends to be related to, there might have been a military hospital near Netley, Brockenhurst is a New Zealand military hospital, so you have an area of land set aside. Within the Second World War, because I think they knew what would happen from the First World War, areas were set aside for service plots, so you tend to get little parcels of land within local authority cemeteries, and you then get what we call in the commission scattered graves. These are the private graves because they died here from wounds, illness or injury, or sickness or other means. Some did make it back from the Western Front before March 1915, because that was the veto. It said after March 1915, nobody would be brought back, regardless of their status and standing. So I think it was the Queen Mother's brother is buried in France, and that was quite, I think, a bit of bill with a lot of the royal families and the rich, because they wanted to bring the sons over. They said no. If the poor, if you can't get them all back, no one's going back. So that was decided, and that's when we then started to have cemeteries need to lay out. So in this country, or in the UK, where we have private graves, the family have the option to have a commission headstone or place their own private memorial on, which is why, in obviously cemeteries for later, there's a mix of that here. And you go, you'll see some private memorial, might be a cross, herb set, we have a commission headstone. Some have both. But on the commission standard headstone, you tend to get, you can't see it. So the British headstones, I'll just say British, it's the regimental cap badges. And regiments had a bit of an input on what they wanted and how they wanted it. For the Canadians, the Army's the maple leaf, the Air Force has their Air Force badge, the Navy has a different badge as well. For the Canadians, the Australians are very similar. So for the Army, you have the Rising Sun cap badge, which is synonymous with the Australian Imperial Forces, the Army side of life, the Air Force and the Navy had different badges. New Zealanders were purely for all their headstones other than the RAF, I think, and maybe the Navy, they've gone for the Fernleaf. The South Africans have got a Springbok, and the Air Force have got a slightly different cap badge. And Indian tend to be very similar to regimental cap badges, or the Muslim, they have got slightly different wording or pattern on there. So I quite like British because it shows all the old cap badges. I quite like cap badges. So I quite find that interesting going along. Certainly at Brockwood Military Cemetery, we've got 5,500 burials. There's so many different old cap badges, and we can go through amongst them and see them. I find it quite interesting. What you also have in this cap badge, you have the particulars of that serviceman, their rank, their number, their name. I went to the commission and nobody's still been able to tell me why. Predominantly, most of the surname and initials, but somehow some people get their full name on, and the odd one gets a nickname on. I think stonemason got a backhander from the family, can you put their nickname on? No one has been able to simply say, to do the regiments having their say, but that artillery doesn't have a full name on, and that artillery hasn't. So no one, everybody knows it, research and find me the answer, that'd be great. We also have the unit and the date of death, obviously we know, and their age. Some don't have age. The age will only be done if that can be verified with the family. So every person who was died in the First and Second World War, their family member would have been sent a casualty verification, i.e. this is what's going to be on your son or father or daughter's headstone. First of all, people moved around. So some of that information, if it was unverified, it wouldn't go on, i.e. the age. Okay? So that's why some have ages on, some don't have ages on. Also have a religious symbol. Default was Church of England. Got a feeling Catholic have a slightly larger cross. That's my understanding. And if they are non-conformist or other denomination, or chose not to have a cross on, they did have a cross on. So it came as default Church of England. And at the bottom, their personal inscription. First of all, you had to pay. That was the original list. I think it was 66 characters and so much, but obviously not everything was there to afford that. So soon after, they decided we won't charge. Not everyone would have got the message, so that's why first of all you tend to see personal inscriptions at the bottom. New Zealanders decided not to have them on at all, so no New Zealand headstone should have one on. If it's got one on, that's got an after date, i.e. someone will put on afterwards. You tend to see more second or more personal inscriptions because they didn't charge. It's like if you want 66 characters, you get a personal inscription on the bottom. And our premise, the name lives forevermore. What we do is the name. As soon as that name becomes illegible, all the personal inscription becomes illegible. If we can, if it might be the J, we might seek to do engraving and re-engrave it. But if the name's illegible, we replace that. So the name lives forevermore. The other information has to be identifiable. So if you can identify it through post office rifles, if the eye was a bit dodgy in rifles, you can still make out it's post office rifles. But if the whole thing is not, we'll replace that. Other things you'll see, structures, you'll see in cemeteries, cross of sacrifice. Tends to be a weakness where there's 50 or more casualties, you'll have a cross of sacrifice. In the cemetery, there are different sizes. In general, rule of thumb, people go, the more casualties, the bigger cross you have. It's generally what space there is in the churchyard, or the space where the cross sacrifice. Sometimes the more casualties, the bigger the cross. Not always the case. And the other bit is the stone remembrance. That is where you have 1,000 or more casualties. You'll have a stone remembrance. And then they live there forevermore. Excellent side. But the premise of that was the cross is obviously very Church of England, very Christian. The name of the stone remembrance was meant to be designed by classical architecture. Supposedly no straight line on it, but it's meant to be just be an agnostic, non-faith altar or where people can lay a wreath or whatever they want to do. And that's the premise of the stone remembrance. And these are the highlights of the bigger sites you've got. global commitments, that's our spread across the globe. And you can see that a lot of the most of it is fighting in the Middle East, Europe, Second World War alliance. I've been on to Costa Rica, got one commemoration in Costa Rica, a young sailor, hand to pinch song, no family member has ever been to visit that person. So if I'm on holiday, Busman's holiday, if there's anything I can get to, I will normally go visit. I got there, Century Fox. I didn't just go, I could just see his headstone, so I knew the headstone was still there. So I'm always like, I went to Corfu, what's the name Corfu, which is called Cemetery in Corfu. That's our largest sites, that's Tyne Cot and Tiet Bar. So Tiet Bar hasn't got that many burials, but it's got the Tiet Bar Memorial is over 70,000 names on there. The memorial at Tyne Cot, I think many days over 50,000 listed memorial, those who've got their own grave. But obviously that got full, and then they did this memorial at Tyne Cot. I think the memorial at Tyne Cot is 28,000. I think the burials are somewhere 12,000. And the Tiet Bar is 70,000. And they're all those memorials tend to be, the one at Tiet Bar is for the Somme. Not just the Battle of Somme, but all those who killed up the Somme front, that area like that. Other sites, Gallipoli, Iraq, Kenya, Alamein, Singapore, United Kingdom, over 300,000 commemorations, 13,000 locations, 1,700 war graves. I've got the most commemorations and the census, so in the south east of England, and we've got that many stones. We have a number of volunteers that help us look after that. Is there a nice amount of volunteer? So that we have I'll touch that at the end. We also commemorate a number of different nationalities in conjunction with our equivalences in those countries by sort of a local arrangement. So we look after Polish graves here, and if there are any in Poland, they'll look after ours. Simple arrangement, that's what we're after. Czechoslovakian, German, and Dutch. So we will look after those. So German tends to be either POWs, First and Second World War, or aircraft, or naval people. So they will look after ours where we don't have Common War stuff. There are other nationalities, Serbian, Portuguese, Brazilian, there's quite a Russian, Soviet forces and Russian forces. So our work, I think most people remember the headstone, but it's also the gardening and horticulture. Where possible, we will embed horticulture into our plots where we own the plot. As Gertrude Jeeple was our Alan Titchmarsh of the day, who set up our horticultural standards based on an English wood garden. So there's a lot of myth about that if it's a New Zealand one, it will be New Zealand planting, if it's an Australian one, it will be Australian. There might be a subtle nod to those nationalities, but by and large it is what planting works in those environments. And that changes. We notice in the southeast of England, roses don't tend to grow anymore. Lots of rabbits, lots of deer as well. And the climate is changing as well. So we're having to change our planting to become animal proof as well as climate proof as well. But that's our progress. It's based on an English country garden. And the planting has a purpose. It's meant to. This might sound quite crass, but my view on it is that star of the show is the headstone. That's the most important thing in that cemetery and that plot. And that's the reason why I have a job today doing that. The planting is the chorus line that supports that star of the show and helps that star of the show stand out. And then we have the turf, which is the stage it sits on. So it has an important part to play, but it should never over-dominate the headstone, overgrow and hide it. And some of the planting we have to do, we have intermediate planting. And what we aim to do throughout the year is have different planting doing different things at the time of year. So we always have a point of interest, some colours, some different textures. And in front of the headstone we have low-growing plants that have two purposes: adds colour, adds texture, but also anti-splash, so it prevents mud splash back on the headstone. So it's low-growing stuff. But naturally some areas we can't get into that. And then even in this country, we're trying to put horticultural plot in it's under a tree, dog walking route. We having to look at different ways to do horticulture. But we still have we still have some standard bits of that. Reconstruction. This is Iraq after the conflict back in the 2000s, 2010, 2011. That's Basra and Mosul. So today that work is got back into where we can. We still have areas we can't get to, but we will. Our repairing, you can see that's the renovation in the middle going put back in. We have cemeteries in Archangel. We've got cemeteries in Odessa. But we have, believe it or not, contacts with Russian people keeping an eye on those in Archangel and the Ukrainian keeping an eye on those in Odessa. We did have staff in Gaza. They, all one family, were moved out and were working in Egypt. So that was done through us, working with the British Embassy and allowing their staff. The staff, the one family that stayed wanted to stay. So they're safe as far as I know. And our work, once we can go back into Gaza War Cemetery, will be to put it back to how it should be. So that's our work. It's never ending, which is a good thing. It means our life should always have a job. And there should always be an importance, and there should always be jobs for down the line. We also get involved in reburials and rededications. I touched on those before, commonly with us, certainly in Belgium and France. Areas of the Somme, also in Belgium, excavations and will uncover bodies, and every attempt therefore is done to identify those casualties and DNA testing. You might see the MOD war detectors if you look at a program on the TV or on a Facebook page. So we work with them. So when a casualty is found, effectively the casualty belongs to the MOD, and the JCCC is the fancy, is the official joint compassionate casualty cell, JCCC. That when the casualty is found, they've got a historic part, and they put an MOD casualty, and their job to try and identify. They work in conjunction with us, so once they have an identification or not, we will then allow the means to then be reburied in an appropriate cemetery where that casualty may have found near to. So there's constantly burials. Some are identified, some are not, so they'll sadly go back as an unidentified unknown soldier of the Great War, or unknown sailor, or whatever it might be. But where they are, they can go back in, and they have a full military burial as they would have on the day. I've been to a few of them. They're quite emotive, even though it's 100 years after a death, it's still very emotive. And then I think the one on the right side is Lewes British Cemetery. So Lewes Cemetery has been extended. There's a lot of work going on the Canal North, and they think they're going to find 300 to 600. So they've opened up a new British cemetery next to the old Lewes Cemetery in France. And rededication, what that is a bit like we have non-commemorated in the UK. We have people who walk around the battlefield, that's why I've gone to this job. There's like, go and see a cemetery. When I was at Port Edstone, a member of the family was able to go do something else. I was walking around the cemetery, or go around battlefields, or the likes. So yeah, people go around who will find a headstone, and it might be a second lieutenant to whatever it might be, and if the dates are simultaneous, people will work it down to try and identify who that casualty was. And if they've got a strong enough case, that's put into the commission. It's worked then with JCCC, as well as an adjudicator is the National Army Museum. So we have an adjudicator, and if they decide that that headstone, which previously was an unknown, can now be a known, then be dedicated as a known. And that's the contentious bit about John. I won't get into that for my time. So I'll drive into the UK. So this will only take about 5 minutes, if that's okay. 5 to 10 minutes. So, United Kingdom, Northern area. So that's who I work for. That's my director, is the director of this, and we are responsible for UK, Denmark, Estonia, Faroe Islands, Gibraltar. I'm not sure how Gibraltar got into the north, but obviously my boss starts going to Gibraltar. Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, Republic, Russia, West, Sweden, and Ukraine. So in there we've sort of got over 300,000 commemorations, 30,182 sites, and some of those, 10,000, nearly 11,000 have got less than 10 burials. And 4,500 got a single commemoration, one headstone. My churchyard and heritage being one of them. So we've got a variety of sites. Runnymede Air Force Memorial, Scampton will be close to London, probably to the RAF in RAF territory. Edinburgh Cumberland Bank, they've got granite headstones, they're laid incumbent because the ground conditions are such. I think most they are, which is very similar to some. I think it's in Bolton or Calais, but it's very sandy soil. So if you see them in the Cumberland, it's because they can't keep them standing up. If you go around some of our, if you do happen to walk into it in the UK, some family members chose to have the headstone incumbent on their private grave. So if you find them laying on and then they face up, a slight angle, that's normal. Some family, and some churchyards or some local authorities wouldn't allow them to be stood apart. So sometimes it's not our rules, it's other people's rules we have to play by. And again, we've got a variety of stakeholders. We touched on, we look after Norwegians as well, Australian, they are more organised, but we have quite a big Anzac, 25th of April every year. There's quite a big Anzac community of commemorations. So I've got Brockenhurst, which is probably New Zealand. I've also got Harefield, which is by Uxbridge, which is an Australian. So there's a lot of Anzac. So it's a big stakeholder. It's not yet a 6-9 push. Cannock Chase is a German cemetery. Has anybody up there, Cannock Chase? No. So there was I think it was a PW camp there, first answer, I think. But after the Second World War, a lot of the air crews that were in smaller churchyards were exhumed and brought into Cannock Chase. There are still some dotted around, but most of them are brought to Cannock Chase. In the UK, that's how it's set up. So we split down to 7 regions. Scotland, north area, west area, east, southwest, southeast, and Ireland. And my colleague in Ireland looks after the Scandinavian bit. Well, that's me in the southeast, looking after what theory looks like the smallest area. It's the smallest area, so I've got the most commemorations. And I've got London, which is a challenge. And it's just touching on our work. So we have volunteers, tour guides, this is how we do it in the UK. Talks about this, public engagement. We've got masons who do repairs to our structures. We've got a team of S&Cs that will install headstones. That's in Moss, I think that's the middle one. And we run volunteer days, talks, tour guides, and numerous ceremonies throughout the year. Not just remembrance. Remembrance is naturally a busy time for the Commission, but we have commemorations throughout the year. Different nationalities, different organisations, different commemorations background throughout the year. There's various ceremonies we have to make sure our site should always be bang on all the time, but when we have a ceremony, we want to make sure it's at the spot for the day as well. So that's sort of what we do. So in the southeast, I've got 1,763 locations to look at. So they're not all mine. I've got a team, of course, to have their structures, but generally our works team, they carry out inspections, they carry out cleaning, routine repairs of structures, and they carry out the installs. The interesting one about that headstone, if my memory serves me right, that's a Hawkinge, which is synonymous with Battenberg. There's quite a few Battenberg. But there's an aircraft called Paul Bolton, and there's the Airfix model. The other Airfix models have very elaborate, sort of daring photo paintings. So the aircraft that's on the front of the Paul Bolton Airfix model was flown by that person who's been directed. That's mine, I think. That's who it was. There's a paper called Defiant, I think, that's what Paul Bolton's in. And I'm fairly sure the pilot in that aircraft number is the person being commemorated there. And then horticulture. So I've got 205 horticultural plots that sit in cemeteries and churchyards. That's Brighton. That's the First World War in Brighton. There's also a Second World War one further up the hill, and a German Brookwood Military Cemetery. Runnymede is ours, land given to us, but it's not a cemetery. So our responsibility is to carry out horticultural maintenance. Some only have 10 headstones in, and Brighton is probably 400 or 500. Chatham, we look after Harvey for the Admiralty. Gillingham, there's over 1,000 commemorations in the Admiral Cemetery. So I've got a team of horticulture, a team of works, team that look after that. 6 of the plots are in Brookwood, and 1 is Runnymede. So if you take those off, that's 199 horticultural plots across the south east of England. So our team tend to get around them every 2 weeks. That's the idea. Mobile pairs of 2, go around in the vans and looking after the horticultural plots, make sure the headstones look right. And that's how I'm set up to deliver that. Regional manager me, I have an operations coordinator, my number 2, I've got a senior head gardener who looks after Brookwood and Runnymede, I've got a senior head gardener who looks after horticulture for the south east of England, and then a number of gardeners. An SMC is a skilled maintenance craftsman, it's the installer, so I've got 5 SMCs to help me inspect 1,763 locations. So generally get around every 3 years. And the horticultural staff, GC1s, gardener caretakers. What we do have to support us in the UK, because we're allowed volunteers, and in fact, who is a volunteer or has been a volunteer. Not having on this, just volunteer in general. Yeah? This country wouldn't, I don't think, would move if it was out without volunteers. So we have over 2,000 volunteers that help us, have eyes on, hands on, allocate the cemetery. They go out every 6 months, take photos, give the headstone a scrub with water and a medium stiff scrubbing brush, and they'll trim the grass and keep an eye on them. So without that, we would, the condition of our scattered estate, without sounding too corporate, would be perhaps a lot worse than it is today. Different laws in France about volunteering. In the UK, because we've got a good volunteer now, and what we start to do now, we get volunteer gardeners to look after some of our small horticultural plots, as well as static volunteers in some of our big sites. So without that, the support of volunteers is fantastic. And equally, I get inquiry from a member of the public, and I can send a volunteer to go out and have a look. It saves me having to move one of my 5 members of staff from London to go and look. So the volunteer network is really useful in this country. We also have, this has been going on about 18 months, it's a platform called Forevermore. So what the Commission are trying to achieve is capture the personal stories behind those people that we commemorate. So if you've got the personal stories here, you can upload them to Forevermore, so other people can see. So family members, historical researchers, a breadth of people are uploading stories into the repository. They then get fact-checked to a certain degree. I've done a lot of research with people. There is perhaps embellishments in my own family's military stories. Supposedly my grandfather was David Niven's T-boy in India. David Niven served in India, but not during the Second World War. He ran something for military service called Phantom. So my grandfather was the King of all Rifles. And David Niven was in the Rifle Brigade. So I just think they swapped officers. And he was in India and Burma before the Second World War. So that's a bit of the story. The truth, what we didn't know is he landed on D-Day. Not D-Day, landed normally on D plus 78. So they fought for a car and the Mars. Definitely David Niven's T-boy in India. But it's quite more. But so this is about capturing those stories. So long stories, personal ones that you want to share, Google Forevermore, and then upload your story and pictures and the likes. It's a repository so we can capture those stories. And that's me. I literally could talk for hours. But I can talk for an hour on headstones, to be fair. It's such an enormity, and it's such a privilege to work for doing this. It's an enormous sense of achievement. My own pressures, my own self-pressures generally, to do the best we can by the people we commemorate. They're the most important people in my job.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely fascinating. And it's set the tone for what we're going to talk about later on, which is our own headstones in our own church. But we'll have a quick break, like a 50-minute break if you'd like to get a drink, have a leg stretch, and then we will resume. And there will be an opportunity to ask any questions at the end of the